Villela, and I'm a senior trainer here at Letterland. We are so excited that you've decided to use our Grade 2 Second Edition program materials. As an experienced Letterland teacher, you are familiar with how our program works, how units and lessons go together. However, the second edition does feature several new routines, new resources, and revisions to the sequence and the lesson design. Even our pilot schools will find there are some significant changes between the version they used and this final second edition. Some of that as a result of the great feedback they gave us during the pilot. Ideally, you should attend a grade 2 second edition full day training, whether virtual or in person. And at the end of our discussion, I'll provide some links to resources, tools, and ways to get some training at the end to kind of give you some ideas. But in the meantime, I will go over the big changes that are going to have the biggest impact on what your day to day teaching is going to look like and how you can get yourself oriented, like what you need to look at first and read most, just to get you sorted and ready to get started this school year. So, with that in mind, if you have access to your grade 2 second edition teacher's guides, pause this video and go get them now. And while you're at it, go get something to take some notes with. And I'll see you in a sec. So as you can see, there is quite a bit that has changed or has been added from the classic to the second edition, even from the pilot to the second edition. We've updated how materials look as well as the instructional design and the content. And it can feel a bit disorienting at first, especially if you've been using the classic version for some time. But I really do think that the changes and the updates to the second edition have been truly purposeful. And once you get familiar and comfortable with what they are and what everything looks like, you're going to find them to be so much easier to use, and that makes your instruction more effective and definitely more fun. Um, so let's take a few minutes and let's start looking at some of those big changes. And let's start with just kind of the materials as a whole. And honestly, probably the biggest changes that you're going to notice is in the guides. So if you've been using second grade materials, you're used to either two of the smaller old ones or this one big one where everything was together, whole group, small group, assessment, strategies, everything was jammed into one, or if it's really old, two manuals. And there was a lot of information in those manuals, and some people found it kind of overwhelming and even difficult to get to all of the juicy bits that were in there. And then if you needed to share or collaborate with someone, it could be really problematic. So the four manuals, they really help with some of that because each manual has a specific focus. And that focus allows that manual to be more streamlined, to be a little bit more efficiently organized. And it also makes it easier to share materials with a colleague in the classroom, and which also just makes it easier to be flexible in your instruction. So I'm actually really excited about having the four manuals. I really think it's going to help make teaching easier. Some of the materials, all of the materials in the kit have been updated for the new characters. Some of the materials also had a few additional tweaks, like the word cards were updated to be just make sure they were all correct, fix all the little editing mistakes, make the organizational box that they're in a little easier to use and to access. The picture code cards, there were some new ones added for some of the new graphemes that were taught. And then the posters, there are new posters added or they've been updated, and the bookmarks. So nothing significantly different about the materials, just more tweaking and refining, and of course, updating everything for the new characters. Probably the biggest change to the materials, other than the manuals themselves, would be the consumables. So instead of having several different copy masters where you have to copy enough for all the kids, and put it together in some sort of a notebook or um, folder, you now have all of the different copymaster content consolidated and organized into one set of phonics practice books for each student. So each student will have a set of phonics practice books, and those phonics practice books cover decoding and encoding your spelling, fluency practice, dictation, word structure, syllables, handwriting. So everything's just kind of put together, and it's all organized and aligned with the units themselves. And I did mention the characters, how everything's been updated for those new characters. I'm not going to really talk about the new characters. I am going to draw your attention to the link at the top of the page. So if you want to go to our website and specifically look for the new characters, you can go and find out the detailed stories of each new character, why they changed. You know, they have a little story to go with them, which can be very helpful when you're trying to transition kids from the classic to the new characters. And we have transition ideas and tips. But just in general, Letterland updates their characters fairly regularly. This particular update had a number of focuses. One was just to update the world in which the characters live, for the technology and just, you know, the general environment and all the things in the environment, so it felt more relevant, immediately familiar to students. We also wanted to make sure there were more females so that we had a better gender balance, and most importantly, that we could adjust the names wherever possible to make sure that we had as clean an example of the sound that that character is representing in the name. There were a few tweaks to the sequence. Now, the sequence as a whole didn't really change because the K2 sequence in Letterland is aligned to the 6-syllable types, starting with closed syllables and working their way through candle L or consonant LE syllable. And this is done in a systematic, research-based manner. And we didn't want to change that core structure to the sequence, but there were some little tweaks or refinements that we needed to make. Some concepts were moved in order to get to some crucial ones a little earlier. Some that were maybe a little more complex got moved later. There is the review and consolidate section has been clearly marked, so that you know that it's there, and that it's very clear what are kind of the core units that we would hope to cover in a second grade year versus what are the consolidation and optional units. So let's take a minute to look at the guides themselves, and we'll talk about some other changes as they relate to those specific guides. And the first one that we want to do is whole group guide and whole group instruction, because this, along with your small group guide, are going to be the two manuals that you use all the time. And the guide as a whole is pretty much set up the same way that they have been in the past. But now it's a little clearer, the transitions. You have these great colored tabs that help you know that you're going from one section to another and to dive directly into the section that you need. And then in that introductory section, which was always at the beginning of every manual, it's much more extensive, it's much more detailed. It gives really great information about all the foundational literacy skills and concepts that you're teaching in grade 2, why you're teaching them, and why Letterland approaches the instruction the way they do, so that you understand why and how you're doing everything that you're going to be doing in the year. And then for each section, you have a very specific section set of skills and concepts that you're teaching, and the assessment tool or tools that will measure whether or not students have mastered that. And that's just a really nice, clean, cut and dried, this is what you're teaching in this section, and this is how you're going to know whether or not your students have mastered it. The 5-day unit plan is still the 5-day unit plan. So it's essentially the same plan. We didn't want to overhaul it because it's a really good structure. Again, it was just about tweaking it and making it better. So one of the key things that got adjusted is that initial let's review, which is all about making sure that phoneme grapheme correspondence or that phoneme grapheme knowledge is been adjusted to make sure that you are focusing on accuracy and then automaticity. It's a daily practice, and that you have daily, regular, purposeful cumulative review so that students are really consolidating and making automatic their letter sound knowledge. And then probably one of my favorite aspects are these concept recaps. So what that means is that on day one, you introduce a new concept and you practice it in reading. On day two, you're going to review that concept and practice it in spelling. But then on day three, you're going to go back and review and recap that concept with a reading focus and do some guided practice. And day four, you're going to recap and review that concept and do some guided practice within spelling. And then during those recaps, you're also going to be talking about any word structure elements or any morphology elements that are appropriate and relevant to that unit that you're discussing. So it's a really great way of kind of encapsulating the major concepts and themes and reviewing them in a purposeful way. And then all of the routines and procedures for the whole second grade program got a really good look and review. And if they needed to be revised, tweaked, or adjusted, they were. And in some cases, they were replaced with an entirely new strategy. And to help you with those small changes and those big changes is now a very detailed and explicit how to teach section. So before you start Unit 1, you have a tab that says how to teach in your manual. And in that section, you will get detailed and explicit, comprehensive, truly, directions on how to teach and do all the routines and procedures for each day of the 5-day plan. And then there are QR codes that will connect you directly to that same routine or procedure in Phonics Online, where if you'd rather listen to an informational video or watch a demonstration, you can. And then within the lessons, we've built in some other elements that help make it easier for teachers to use them. And one of them is timings in the lessons so that you can kind of gauge how much time you should be spending on each portion and keep your pacing even so you're not rushed. The characters, we have always expected teachers to fade the use of the characters, but it's not always been clear when that should happen and to what degree. Now that has been explicitly built in into the lesson, into the routines and procedures, and even into the graphic design of the lessons. So if it's something like you see on the bottom of the screen where you're building a word, that will always only show the plain side, because when we're blending and segmenting for reading and spelling, we're using plain letters. So everything about both the lesson design and the graphic design are to reinforce that character fading, and there are explicit directions as to when and how that should happen. There also is support for multilingual learners. So you see a box in the bottom with that red line around it and that LS in a circle. That means language support. So if you see that inside of a lesson, that means that this part of the lesson, there might be places or things that you need to do to provide a little additional language support, whether it's for multilingual learners or just for students who have language needs in your classroom. So you'll find these language support boxes strategically placed throughout the lesson where it makes sense. There is also in the appendix a much more detailed section on multilingual learners and language support that is organized around the different components of foundational literacy instruction. And just like we want to make sure that we provide extensive and explicit directions on how to do the routines and procedures, and then kind of provide some support, explicit directions inside the lessons, we need to do the same thing with feedback to students. So teachers need explicit support, both in general up front before they teach, and also explicit support inside the lessons. And we've done that. So the routine and the procedure will be detailed in the how to teach. And the first time you do the routine or procedure in a lesson, it will also be written in great detail. And then it kind of fades. Just like you see here on the screen for let's practice multisyllabic words, there are detailed directions. The first time that you do that in a lesson, you'll see those detailed directions. And then over the next several lessons, the detail will fade till you have more of kind of like a skeleton or um, crib sheet, I guess you could kind of say, just a really short set of directions that remind you of the key elements. For the same thing, we have the same sort of setup for corrective feedback. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you see kind of the general self-correction options. This is in the appendix, and these are just really good strategies. Anytime you're working with a student for reading or for spelling, how do you help them if they make a mistake? But then inside the lesson, there is lesson or unit specific feedback that's in these big red boxes titled corrective feedback that specifically targets the kind of mistake kids are likely to make in that lesson with those specific skills and concepts. So you have kind of that general support, and then you have the specific in lesson support. And then as part of that in-lesson support, we also have spelling tips. So embedded into the lessons, there are tips, again, in these red boxes. Like those red boxes are always going to be full of really good information. So whenever you see one in a lesson, pay attention. So if it says spelling tip, it is a spelling tip or rule or strategy that will help your students be more accurate with their spelling. But if it happens to be more of something that you need to know as a teacher, like you see at the top, the box at the top of the screen here, it'll say either teacher tip or teacher information. And that could be connecting the Letterland lore to the conventional language, or it could just be deepening your understanding of the structure or the language concepts that you're teaching in that unit, just to kind of build your own background knowledge and to make sure that you're confident about what you're teaching and why you're teaching it and how you're teaching it. All the unit stories have been reviewed to try to make sure they are as decodable as possible. We have added to all the stories the new concept, so you know what the unit concept is that's tied to that story, as well as the tricky words and any story words that are part of that story. And then many of the reader's theater have also been rewritten as narrative text so that they're a little easier to use in the classroom. And there are also some usability or features that have been added as a whole, like there are unit word charts, and this is just a one place to go to see all of the units, all of the concepts, all of the words, all of the sentences, all the decodable text, like everything you could possibly need to know about the concepts and the words and the sentences and the text for the entire grade level. It's in that unit word chart. And it's just a really nice way for teachers to see a giant picture of everything, but in a very clean, simple way. So you can go pick words or sentences or text for practice if you need to for small groups. You've also got high frequency tricky word lists. You've got Letterland characters and story summaries. So lots of tools to support teachers as they are working through their instruction. So the small group guide, there's now a new small group guide, and the small group guide is aligned to the whole group guide. It's organized essentially the same way. You can see you've got similar tabs, and the lessons themselves are aligned to the whole group lessons. So you still have a 5-day plan. There were some adjustments to the small group and independent 5-day plan, just like there were to the whole group one. There are more opportunities for writing. There are more opportunities for reading decodable text, and there are more opportunities to review and consolidate and practice those concepts to automaticity, with the goal being that if you combine whole group with small group, with independent and partner instruction, that kids are reading decodable text every single day of the unit and sometimes several times during a day. So the lessons in the small group guide, there are fully written, fully fleshed out standard lessons that match the whole group lesson. So if you're in Unit 16, Day 2, there's a Unit 16, Day 2 small group lesson. But sometimes you need to do something a little bit different than that standard lesson, whether it's because of a time constraint or an instructional focus. And so the differentiation guide, which is at the beginning of that small group manual, helps you make those additional adjustments so that your small group instruction can be as effective as possible for that group of students. And just like there's a how to teach for whole group, there's a how to teach for small group to provide that extensive, explicit directions and guidance on how to do all the different routines and procedures in a standard small group lesson. There is still an embedded intervention strand. It is in the back of the small group manual. So everything related to small group instruction is going to be in this small group manual. So there is the general small group instruction, and then there's that more intensive embedded intervention strand, which is also small group instruction. And that is specifically for students who need more support. Now, that embedded intervention, it's a 5-step plan, just like it was before, but the 5-step plan is a little different in that it alternates between a reading focus and a spelling focus. And the idea is it kind of goes reading, spelling, and then you have this flex day. And it is in there, it's designed to be about every 5th day, but it doesn't have to happen exactly every 5th day. It's a flexible day that you can put into your sequence of instruction whenever you need to provide some targeted support and practice, or maybe you're ready to do some progress monitoring and assessment. And so you've got a standard sort of reading, spelling lesson plan and this flexible day so that you can provide the support or do the progress monitoring that you need to when you need to. And to support that, on Phonics Online, you have a robust embedded intervention set of resources in that teacher resources folder, which includes your own intervention word chart, as well as lesson plans and lots of other tools and resources. So the whole group and the small group guide, they're organized along the lines of the units and the lessons. But the next two guides that we're going to talk about are more organized along the specific concept or focus or the type of, in this case, type of assessment that you're working on. So your assessment and progress monitoring manual has a print component, but everything that you might want to project on a screen or print out is also on the teacher resources under the assessment folder on Phonics Online. So you have both a print and a digital version. There are 3 major types of assessment. You have core assessments, which everybody does. And those are designed twofold. One is you're going to give them at different times of the year. The screening assessment that you see up at the top, that's to determine kind of what did students know or carry over from 1st grade, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, and to begin to give you some information about how to organize students into small groups at the beginning of the year. And then you have those ongoing unit assessments. Those are your primary assessment tool. That is your formative assessment that you use all throughout the year. And then you have a summative assessment to determine, okay, I have taught this set of skills over the course of the 2nd grade year. Which ones have they mastered? Which ones have they not? And you can share that with their 3rd grade teacher. Those ongoing unit assessments or formative assessments are essentially the same as they have always been. You have a unit spelling check. It's administered very much the same way as the classic. The biggest difference is you don't have as many items to give, so that we don't have as much of an issue with stamina. And then for the fluency check, it too is designed to be essentially the same. It's just now you have the choice between the student list or the unit story. And technically you always did, but it's never really been clear. And so now in the core instructional directions for how to give the fluency check, there is guidance on how to know whether or not students might need to go with the student list versus the unit story, and what are the tools and resources to support that. And then Phonics Online and the teacher resources has a number of data assessment or data analysis tools that you can use. The group record that you see on the screen here is one of those. They're all pre-slugged for the different assessments that you're going to give and what their mastery criteria is. And when you enter that information in, it'll all color code itself versus, whether they are at mastery or not. It'll tell you what percentage of students are at mastery and what percentage are not. and which students are struggling with which aspects of the ongoing assessments. The other thing is each one of those students, their name, when you type in their name, there is a link to an individual profile that allows you to see that one specific student's data history, and it has a place where you can add anecdotal information, data from other assessment tools, so that you can have a comprehensive picture of that student's progress and literacy in one place. Supplementary assessments are just that. They are extra assessments that you can use with specific students as needed. The diagnostic tools are designed to be used in conjunction with the screening assessment at the beginning of the year, and they're really there for you to use with any student where you need to dig a little deeper because maybe the screening didn't give you quite enough information, or you still have some questions and you just need to dive a little deeper. So you can use those. The progress monitoring tools are there to use with your small groups to measure growth on specific skills. So whether it's like high frequency tricky words, or maybe it's phonemic awareness, you have specific tools that if you need to measure that set of skills, you have a tool to help you measure that skill with that student or that group of students. And all of the supplementary progress monitoring tools have multiple batteries so that you can give it multiple times over the course of the year. The embedded intervention assessments are specifically for the students who are using the embedded intervention. And there are assessment tools to help figure out where to start along the scope of sequence with a group of students. There are specific progress monitoring tools that allow you to measure mastery of skills within a set of units, and these are aligned to the scope and sequence of the core instruction. And then there are those same sort of supplementary progress monitoring tools that are skill-based if you really need to focus on letter sounds or phonemic awareness. The final manual is this Tricks and Strategies manual. This is a really great tool for helping to find a different or a new or an extra strategy. It is organized by the different components of foundational literacy skill, as you can see on the screen. But then you can dive a little deeper inside of that. So for instance, let's say you need to focus on letter sounds with a student who's still really struggling with some of those. So you can find letter sounds on here, but then if you move over to the right underneath the skill focus, you can see the specific skill that the different activities support. So if you need to go from phoneme to grapheme, you can look and see there are 4 or 5 different strategies. Like you could do the lost and found game to do that with a student. So it has all of the routines and procedures that are used in your core instruction, plus all the other routines and procedures, games, and activities that can be used to supplement that in small group, or, you know, if it's right before a holiday or a fire drill has messed up your standard instruction and you need to do something a little different, you can kind of mix it up. And then you'll see there's a QR code at the bottom of that page, because as we've mentioned before, all of these print activities or pages are aligned to the digital version on Phonics Online. So if you looked up the lost and found game here, you can also look up the lost and found game on Phonics Online. It's organized exactly the same way with all the same big kind of bucket categories. But then when you go in there, there's the printable information, which is very similar to what's in here, but there's also going to be an informational video or a demonstration video so that you can see what it looks like in a classroom. All right. So before I tell you a little bit about resources and training, all we're doing here today was just to give you a really big picture idea of the major changes and kind of the major impacts to your instruction. I was not able to go into nearly the detail that you probably would really like. So if you're not going to get to a training before you have to start instruction, I would really highly recommend that there are 2 things that you would look at first. First, get your whole group guide out read the introductory pages and read the how to teach. Really, really read those well and end up and really get familiar with those routines and procedures, especially if you've been using it, the classic. There are changes to them. It's going to be hard to kind of get yourself out of that groove that you've been in for a while. So it's really important that you really kind of look at these, really read them, really try to tease out the differences when it's just a small change versus the totally new routines. So the introduction and the how to teach, really get yourself familiar with those pages and those routines and procedures, how they're similar and different from what you've been doing. And then the other thing is get out your assessment and progress monitoring manual, go to your core assessments and look at the assessments that you're going to be giving at the beginning of the year, which are your screening assessments. And the directions for which ones to give, how and what, everything is all in here. So you can get your materials ready. You can make your student copies of things. You can make your record forms. Like, you can get all your materials prepped. So I would really say that in order to get instruction up and running, these would be the two manuals I would get into first, and specifically looking at what you've got to do to get instruction up and running. And then the next thing would be to look at the small group manual and the how to teach and what those lessons look like. But you have a little bit of wiggle room, and you don't have to have those up and running the very first day of school. All right, so above and beyond that, go to our website, look up grade 2 under curriculum, and there are lots of different resources, supports, information about the second edition and what's going on, what it looks like, what the materials are, and everything else. And there is a fantastic leaflet called What's New in Grade 2 that you can, there's a link to that on that page that I was just showing you right here. It's the very first thing, What's New leaflet. Click on that. It goes into a great deal of detail, far more than what I was able to go into here. And it really kind of shows you exactly all the things. And there's even a comparison chart so you can see exactly what the classic versus that second edition look like. And then if you are trying to get to training and maybe your district's not going to have a training, but you want to try to get to one, go again to our website, but this time under the training tab, look at upcoming sessions, and you can look at for one of our grade 2 second edition initial trainings that are virtual, and possibly get to one of those. And then always just know you can reach out. We would love to hear from you. Give us a call, email. We'd love to know what's working for you and also how we can support you better. So thank you very much for hanging out with me for a few minutes today. I hope that this was at least somewhat helpful in getting you started and helping you figure out where to start digging into these new materials. I hope you have a great year using Letterland second edition. I'm excited for you. So bye.